Marcus Chun adjusted his stethoscope as he stepped out of the ambulance at St. Mary's General Hospital. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and he could already hear the familiar sounds of the emergency department coming to life. Nurses hurried past with clipboards, doctors discussed cases in hushed tones, and the automatic doors whooshed open and closed with mechanical precision. To everyone around him, Marcus was just another paramedic. At 34 years old, he had been working the streets for 8 years, responding to everything from heart attacks to car crashes. His colleagues knew him as someone who stayed calm under pressure, had steady hands during emergencies, and could make split-second decisions that often meant the difference between life and death. What they didn't know was that these skills came from a very different kind of training. Marcus wheeled the stretcher through the sliding doors, his patient a construction worker who had fallen from scaffolding. The man was conscious, but in considerable pain from what appeared to be a broken leg. As they moved through the busy hallway, Marcus's trained eyes automatically scanned the environment. It was a habit he couldn't shake, even after all these years in civilian life. "Room 3 is ready," called out Sarah Martinez, the head nurse. She had worked with Marcus countless times and trusted his judgment completely. "What do we have?" 28-year-old male fell approximately 12 feet from scaffolding, Marcus reported as they transferred the patient to the hospital bed. Possible fracture to the left tibia and fibula, stable vitals throughout transport. He's been conscious and alert the entire time. Dr. Jennifer Walsh took over from there, and Marcus began cleaning his equipment. This was the routine part of his job, the mundane tasks that filled the spaces between emergencies. But his mind was elsewhere, thinking about the phone call he had received the night before. "Marcus, we need to talk." The voice belonged to his former commanding officer, Colonel David Harper. It had been 3 years since they last spoke, 3 years since Marcus had walked away from his military career and the specialized unit that had shaped him into something most people couldn't even imagine. Marcus had served as a designated marksman in the Army's 75th Ranger Regiment. His official role was to provide precision fire support for his unit, but his unofficial reputation was built on shots that others considered impossible. During his 6 years of service, he had been deployed to Afghanistan twice and Iraq once. The statistics were classified, but Marcus knew the numbers by heart. 147 confirmed eliminations, with the longest shot recorded at 1,247 meters. The transition to civilian life had been challenging. The adrenaline rush of combat operations was replaced by the different, but equally intense pressure of saving lives rather than taking them. Marcus had chosen to become a paramedic because it allowed him to use his ability to stay calm under extreme pressure, but this time to heal instead of harm. His partner, Tom Rodriguez, climbed back into the driver's seat of their ambulance. "Ready for the next call?" Tom asked, checking the GPS for their assigned patrol area. Tom was 26, enthusiastic about the job, and looked up to Marcus as a mentor. He had no idea that his partner had skills that went far beyond emergency medical care. "Always ready," Marcus replied, settling into the passenger seat. The radio crackled to life with dispatch, sending another unit to a minor traffic accident across town. For now, they were clear to patrol their sector and wait for the next emergency. As they drove through the city streets, Marcus thought about Colonel Harper's words. The colonel hadn't given details over the phone, but there was something in his voice that suggested this wasn't a social call. "There's been some chatter," Harper had said cryptically. "Intelligence suggests something might be brewing in your area. We need someone with your particular skills to keep an eye on things." Marcus had left that life behind for good reason. The weight of taking human lives, even in service of his country, had become too heavy to carry. Every confirmed kill had a face, a story, a family somewhere who would never know what happened to their loved one. The precision that made him an exceptional sniper had also made him acutely aware of the finality of each shot. But Harper's call suggested that his past might not be willing to let him go so easily. The radio interrupted his thoughts. "Unit 47, respond to 1247, Oak Street for a possible cardiac event. 67-year-old male, chest pains, difficulty breathing." Tom flipped on the lights and siren, and they were racing through traffic toward their next patient. This was what Marcus loved about his current job. Every call was a chance to save a life, to use his training and skills for something positive. The adrenaline was still there, but it came from a completely different source. They arrived at a modest two-story house where an elderly man was sitting on his front porch, his wife hovering nearby with obvious concern. Marcus quickly assessed the situation as they approached with their equipment. The man's color was pale, and he was sweating despite the cool morning air. "Sir, I'm Marcus, and this is Tom. We're paramedics. Can you tell me what's happening?" Marcus knelt beside the man, already reaching for his stethoscope. "Started about 20 minutes ago," the man gasped. "Pressure in my chest, like an elephant sitting on it. My arm's been tingling too." Marcus listened to the man's heart while Tom prepared the EKG machine. The rhythm was irregular, and, combined with the other symptoms, it painted a clear picture. "We need to get you to the hospital right away," Marcus explained calmly. "It looks like you might be having a heart attack." As they loaded the patient into the ambulance, Marcus caught sight of a black sedan that seemed to be following them. It was probably nothing, but his training had taught him to notice details that others might miss. The car maintained its distance, but matched their turns through several city blocks. During the transport to St. Mary's, Marcus worked to stabilize their patient while keeping one eye on the sedan through the rear window. The man's condition was serious, but manageable if they could get him to the cardiac unit quickly enough. Tom was driving with practiced efficiency, weaving through traffic while maintaining a smooth ride for their patient. ETA 2 minutes. Tom called back from the driver's seat. Marcus was inserting in 4 when the patient suddenly went into cardiac arrest. The monitor flatlined, and Marcus immediately began CPR compressions. "Tom, step on it," he called out, never breaking rhythm with the chest compressions. The training that had made him a deadly sniper now served him well in a completely different context. The same steady hands that could thread a bullet through a target at incredible distances now delivered precise, life-saving chest compressions. The ability to remain calm under extreme pressure, to shut out distractions, and focus entirely on the task at hand, was exactly what this situation required. After 2 minutes of CPR and 1 shock from the defibrillator, the patient's heart rhythm returned. Marcus continued monitoring his vitals as they pulled into the hospital's emergency bay. The black sedan was nowhere to be seen. "Welcome back," Marcus said quietly to the patient, who was conscious again, but very weak. "You gave us quite a scare there." As they transferred the patient to the emergency team, Dr. Walsh nodded approvingly at Marcus's work. "Nice job getting him back," she said. "That was some textbook CPR." Marcus smiled, but didn't mention that his training had been anything but textbook. While cleaning their equipment afterward, he noticed Tom looking at him with a mixture of admiration and curiosity. "How do you stay so calm?" Tom asked. "I mean, when his heart stopped, you didn't even seem fazed. It was like you'd done this 1,000 times before." "Experience," Marcus replied simply. It wasn't exactly a lie, though the experience Tom was thinking of was probably very different from Marcus's actual background. As they prepared for their next call, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Coffee shop on 5th Street, 3 p.m. Come alone." He recognized the writing style immediately. Colonel Harper was in town, and whatever he wanted to discuss was important enough to risk breaking protocol by making contact in person. Marcus deleted the message and tried to focus on his job, but the unease was growing. In his experience, when the past reached out to someone who had tried to leave it behind, it usually meant that trouble was coming. The rest of their shift passed without major incidents. A few minor calls kept them busy, but nothing that required Marcus's more specialized skill set. As 3 p.m. approached, he found himself growing increasingly tense. He had built a good life as a paramedic, found purpose in helping people instead of eliminating them. The last thing he wanted was to be pulled back into the world he had worked so hard to escape. But as they returned to the hospital for their shift change, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully constructed new life was about to be tested in ways he hadn't anticipated. The black sedan he had noticed earlier was parked across the street from the hospital, and though he couldn't make out the occupants through the tinted windows, he had the distinct impression that he was being watched. Marcus Chun had spent years learning to save lives instead of taking them, but as he prepared to meet with his former commanding officer, he wondered if the skills that had made him such an effective soldier were about to become relevant again. The transition from sniper to paramedic had been the hardest thing he had ever done, but it might not be the last transformation his life would require. Whatever Colonel Harper wanted to discuss, Marcus had a feeling it would change everything about the quiet, purposeful existence he had built for himself in the years since leaving the military. The past, it seemed, was not quite ready to let him go. The coffee shop on 5th Street was busy with the afternoon crowd when Marcus walked in at exactly 3 o'clock. He spotted Colonel Harper immediately, sitting alone at a corner table with his back to the wall and a clear view of both entrances. Some habits never died, especially in their line of work. Harper looked older than Marcus remembered, with more gray at his temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions and sleepless nights. He was wearing civilian clothes, but his posture and the way he scanned the room marked him as military to anyone who knew what to look for. "Marcus," Harper stood and extended his hand. "You look good. Civilian life agrees with you." "Colonel," Marcus replied, shaking the offered hand. "Though I have to admit, I'm surprised to see you here. What's so important that you risked breaking protocol?" Harper gestured for him to sit down, and Marcus noticed that the colonel had positioned himself so they could both watch the entrances. "We have a situation," Harper began without preamble. "Intelligence has picked up chatter about a planned attack on St. Mary's Hospital." Marcus felt his blood run cold. St. Mary's wasn't just where he worked. It was where he had found purpose again, where he was saving lives instead of ending them. "What kind of attack?" "The details are sketchy, but it appears to be planned by a domestic terrorist cell. They've been monitoring the hospital for weeks, studying shift patterns, security protocols, everything. We think they're planning to take hostages and make some kind of political statement." "Why are you telling me this instead of the FBI or local law enforcement?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Harper leaned forward slightly. "Because the intelligence suggests they're planning to use the hospital's own layout against first responders. Multiple entry points, complex floor plan, lots of civilians who can't be evacuated quickly. It's going to require someone with very specific skills to neutralize the threat with minimal collateral damage." Marcus stared at his former commanding officer. "You want me to go back to being a sniper? I want you to be ready to protect innocent people using whatever skills are necessary," Harper corrected. "You know that building better than anyone. You understand the sight lines, the angles, the positions that would give an attacker the best advantage. More importantly, you have the training to stop them." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, watching the steam rise from his untouched coffee. 3 years ago, he had made a promise to himself that he would never again take a human life. The weight of his military service had nearly broken him, and becoming a paramedic had been his path to redemption. "I saved a man's life today," Marcus said quietly. His heart stopped, and I brought him back. That's who I am now. That's who I chose to become. "And that choice doesn't have to change," Harper replied. "But sometimes, to save lives, you have to be willing to take them. You know that better than most." Marcus looked around the coffee shop at the ordinary people going about their daily lives, completely unaware of the conversation taking place in the corner. A young mother was helping her toddler with a cookie, an elderly couple was sharing a newspaper, and a group of college students was debating something with animated gestures. These were the people he had sworn to protect, both as a soldier and as a paramedic. "What's the timeline?" Marcus asked. "We're not sure. Could be days, could be weeks. But our sources suggest it's imminent. They've been planning this for months, and recent communications indicate they're in the final stages." Harper slid a small electronic device across the table. "Encrypted communicator. If and when this goes down, you'll be our eyes and ears inside the hospital. Local law enforcement will handle the perimeter and evacuation, but we need someone who can operate independently inside the building." Marcus picked up the device and slipped it into his pocket. "What about equipment?" "There's a storage unit downtown. Unit 247 at Secure Space Storage on Industrial Boulevard. Everything you might need is already there." Harper paused. "I know this isn't what you wanted, Marcus, but you're the best chance those people have if this thing goes sideways." As Harper stood to leave, Marcus grabbed his arm. "Why this hospital specifically? What makes St. Mary's a target?" Harper's expression darkened. "There's going to be a medical conference there next week. Prominent doctors, researchers, some government officials discussing pandemic preparedness and biodefense. High-profile targets in a confined space with lots of potential victims. It's exactly the kind of symbolic target these people love." After Harper left, Marcus sat alone in the coffee shop for another 20 minutes, processing what he had learned. The familiar weight of responsibility was settling on his shoulders again, but this time it felt different. This wasn't about following orders or serving national interests in some distant conflict. This was about protecting his colleagues, his friends, the people he worked alongside every day. Marcus drove to the storage facility before heading home. Unit 247 was climate-controlled and larger than he had expected. Inside, he found equipment that brought back memories he had tried hard to forget. The rifle case contained a customized Remington 700 with a high-end scope, the same setup he had used during his final deployment. There were also tactical vests, communication gear, and enough ammunition for an extended engagement. He ran his hands over the rifle's familiar contours. It had been 3 years since he had held a weapon like this, but it felt as natural as breathing. Some skills, once learned to this level, never really faded. The muscle memory was still there, waiting to be activated. Marcus locked the storage unit and drove home to his small apartment across town. He lived simply, with minimal furniture and few personal possessions. The only decoration was a photograph of his old unit, taken during their final deployment. 12 men who had trusted each other with their lives, several of whom hadn't made it home. That evening, Marcus returned to St. Mary's for his night shift. The hospital looked different now that he knew it might become a battleground. He found himself automatically noting sight lines, cover positions, and choke points where attackers might try to establish control. It was like seeing the building through a completely different lens. His partner for the night shift was Janet Williams, a veteran paramedic with 15 years of experience. She was competent, unflappable, and had a dry sense of humor that helped get them through the long overnight hours. As they checked their equipment and prepared for their shift, Marcus struggled with how much he should tell her about the potential threat. "You seem distracted tonight," Janet observed as they loaded fresh supplies into their ambulance. "Everything okay?" "Just thinking about some things," Marcus replied. "Janet, if something ever happened here at the hospital, something dangerous, what would be your first priority?" She gave him a curious look. "Getting patients to safety, same as always." "Why? Are you expecting trouble?" Before Marcus could answer, their radio crackled with an emergency call. "Unit 23, respond to the pediatric wing, room 412. Child in respiratory distress, possible allergic reaction." They hurried through the hospital corridors to the pediatric wing, where they found a 6-year-old girl struggling to breathe. Her parents were frantic, and the nursing staff was already preparing emergency medications. Marcus quickly assessed the situation while Janet prepared the epinephrine injection. "Severe allergic reaction," Marcus confirmed. "Probably food-related. We need to get this AP into her system now." As Janet administered the injection, Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the window of the pediatric room, he could see 2 men in the parking lot who seemed to be observing the building rather than coming or going. They were positioned where they could see multiple entrances and were making notes on a clipboard. The little girl's breathing began to improve as the epinephrine took effect, but Marcus's attention was divided between his patient and the men in the parking lot. When he looked again a few minutes later, they were gone. "Much better," Janet said, checking the child's oxygen saturation. "She's going to be fine, but we should probably keep her under observation for a few hours." As they completed their paperwork and prepared to leave the pediatric wing, Marcus made a decision. "Janet, I need you to listen to me very carefully. There might be a security threat to the hospital in the coming days. I can't give you details, but if anything unusual happens, anything at all, I need you to get yourself and any patients to the safest location possible." Janet stopped writing and looked at him seriously. "Marcus, what are you talking about? What kind of threat?" "I can't say more than that right now, but I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" She nodded slowly. "Of course. We've been partners for 2 years, and I've never known you to be paranoid or dramatic. If you say there might be trouble, I believe you." The rest of their shift passed without incident, but Marcus found himself constantly on edge. Every unfamiliar face in the hospital, every unexpected sound, every deviation from normal routine had him reaching for the encrypted communicator in his pocket. By the time their shift ended at 6 in the morning, he was exhausted from the constant vigilance. As Marcus walked to his car in the early morning light, he noticed the same black sedan from the previous day parked across the street. This time, He could make out the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. Whether they were watching him or the hospital, Marcus couldn't be sure, but the presence of surveillance confirmed that Harper's intelligence was accurate. Marcus drove home through the quiet morning streets, his mind racing with plans and contingencies. He had spent 3 years learning to save lives, and now he might have to use his older, deadlier skills to protect the place where he had found redemption. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the necessity. At home, Marcus sat on his small balcony with a cup of coffee and watched the sun rise over the city. Somewhere out there, people were planning to turn St. Mary's Hospital into a battlefield. They had chosen the wrong target, but they didn't know that yet. They had no idea that one of the paramedics walking the halls of their intended target was a former Army Ranger with skills that most people couldn't imagine. Marcus Chun had become a paramedic to atone for the lives he had taken as a soldier. Now, it seemed, he might have to take lives again to protect the lives he had sworn to save. The circle was closing in ways he never could have anticipated, and he wondered if he would be strong enough to do what might be necessary when the time came. The medical conference at St. Mary's Hospital was scheduled to begin on a Tuesday morning, and by Monday evening, Marcus had confirmed what he feared most. The terrorist cell was making their final preparations. He had spotted at least 3 different surveillance teams around the hospital over the past week, all trying to look casual while mapping out security protocols and shift changes. Marcus arrived for his Monday night shift carrying more than just his usual medical equipment. Hidden in his locker was the encrypted communicator Colonel Harper had given him, along with detailed floor plans of the hospital that he had memorized years earlier but now studied with a different purpose. Tonight felt different, charged with the kind of tension he remembered from his military deployments when everyone knew action was imminent. His partner for the evening was Tom Rodriguez again, the young paramedic who looked up to Marcus as a mentor. Tom was scheduled to work the conference coverage the next day, which meant he would be in the hospital when any attack took place. The thought of Tom being caught in a terrorist assault made Marcus's stomach clench with protective instinct. "Big day tomorrow," Tom said as they checked their equipment. "First time I've worked a conference this size. Doctors coming in from all over the country to discuss pandemic preparedness. Should be interesting." Marcus nodded, though his mind was focused on very different aspects of tomorrow's events. "Tom, I want you to do me a favor tomorrow. If anything unusual happens, anything that doesn't feel right, I want you to get yourself and any patients to the basement level immediately. The structure is more solid down there." Tom gave him a puzzled look. "You've been saying stuff like that all week. Is there something specific I should be worried about?" Before Marcus could answer, their radio interrupted with an emergency call. "Unit 23, respond to 1847 Maple Street for a domestic disturbance. Police are requesting medical standby." As they drove through the night toward the address, Marcus found himself studying the streets with tactical awareness. How many escape routes were there from any given position? What buildings provided good cover? Where would an enemy establish overwatch positions? These were questions he had hoped never to ask again. But the old training was reasserting itself whether he wanted it to or not. The domestic disturbance turned out to be a woman who had been pushed downstairs during an argument with her boyfriend. The police had already arrested the man, and Marcus and Tom focused on treating the woman's injuries. She had a possible concussion and definitely a sprained wrist, but nothing life-threatening. "You're going to be okay," Marcus assured her as they prepared to transport her to St. Mary's. "We'll get you checked out properly at the hospital." During the transport, Marcus noticed the woman watching him with unusual intensity. "You seem different from other paramedics I've met," she said. "More alert, like you're always watching for something." Marcus was surprised by her perceptiveness, especially given her recent head trauma. "Just doing my job," he replied. "My brother was in the Army," she continued. "He had the same way of looking at everything, like he was always ready for trouble." "Are you military?" Marcus admitted. "Long time ago." When they arrived at St. Mary's, Marcus helped transfer the patient to the emergency department. As they were completing their paperwork, Dr. Walsh approached with a clipboard and an expression of mild concern. "Marcus, I need to ask you about something," she said. "There have been some reports of people asking questions about hospital security, staff schedules, that sort of thing. Have you noticed anything unusual?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What kind of questions?" "Supposedly market research for a security company, but the questions were very specific. Emergency protocols, shift changes, how many people are in the building at different times. It made some of our staff uncomfortable. Dr. Walsh, tomorrow during the conference, if anything unusual happens, anything at all, I need you to follow whatever evacuation procedures you're given immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't try to help with anything beyond your immediate patients. Just get to safety. She studied his face carefully. Marcus, you're scaring me a little. Do you know something specific? Marcus chose his words carefully. I know that sometimes bad people target places where good people gather. Tomorrow there will be a lot of good people gathered here. The rest of their shift was quiet, but Marcus spent it conducting a mental inventory of the hospital's layout from a defensive perspective. St. Mary's was a sprawling complex with multiple wings, 7 floors, and dozens of potential entry points. The main lobby had large windows that would be vulnerable to assault, but it also had good sight lines for defensive positions. The parking garage underneath the building could be used for both infiltration and as a secure area for civilian evacuation. When their shift ended at 6 in the morning, Marcus didn't go home. Instead, he drove to the storage unit and retrieved the equipment Colonel Harper had provided. The rifle felt familiar in his hands as he checked its condition and confirmed the scope's 0. He had hoped never to touch a weapon like this again, but circumstances were forcing his hand. Marcus returned to his apartment just long enough to shower and try to get a few hours of sleep. But rest was elusive, his mind replaying scenarios and contingencies. He had been out of active military service for 3 years, but the tactical planning process was like riding a bicycle. Identify the objective, assess the terrain, anticipate enemy actions, plan responses to multiple scenarios. By noon on Tuesday, Marcus was back at the hospital, officially off duty but carrying concealed equipment. The conference was already in full swing, with doctors, researchers, and government officials filling the main auditorium and several smaller conference rooms. Security was present, but minimal, mostly focused on managing parking and controlling access to restricted areas rather than defending against a determined assault. Marcus positioned himself in the main lobby where he could observe the primary entrances while appearing to be just another hospital employee on a break. The encrypted communicator had been silent all morning, but that could change at any moment. At 2:30 p.m., everything changed. Marcus was watching a group of conference attendees discussing pandemic response protocols when he noticed 3 men entering through the main entrance who didn't belong. They were dressed casually but moved with military precision, and one of them was carrying a duffel bag that was the wrong shape and weight for normal personal items. The encrypted communicator in Marcus's pocket vibrated with an incoming message. Multiple suspects approaching target. Unknown weapon status. Maintain position and observe. Marcus acknowledged the message and began moving toward a position that would give him better tactical advantage while keeping the suspects in view. His heart rate had increased, but his mind was calm and focused in a way it hadn't been in 3 years. This was the moment he had been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. The 3 men split up as they entered the hospital, which confirmed Marcus's worst fears. This wasn't a random attack. It was a coordinated assault with multiple entry points and predetermined objectives. One man headed toward the elevators, another toward the main auditorium where most of the conference attendees were gathered, and the third began moving toward the emergency department. Marcus keyed his communicator. 3 suspects confirmed inside the building. Coordinated movement suggests imminent attack. Request immediate law enforcement response. The response was immediate. Units are en route. ETA 8 minutes. Maintain observation and await further orders. 8 minutes was an eternity in this situation. In 8 minutes, dozens of people could be killed or taken hostage. Marcus made a decision that would have been unthinkable 3 years earlier, but now seemed inevitable. He activated the hospital's emergency alert system using a fire alarm pull station, triggering evacuation protocols throughout the building. The loud, piercing alarm would disrupt whatever plans the attackers had while giving civilians a chance to evacuate. It would also alert hospital security and staff that something serious was happening. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Conference attendees began streaming out of the auditorium. Hospital staff started implementing emergency procedures, and the 3 suspects suddenly found their carefully planned attack disrupted by hundreds of people moving in directions they hadn't anticipated. Marcus saw one of the suspects drop his duffel bag and pull out what appeared to be a compact assault rifle. The man was positioning himself near the main exit where evacuating civilians would be forced to pass. This was the moment Marcus had hoped would never come. But training and instinct took over. Moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency, Marcus reached a stairwell that provided access to an upper-level maintenance area. 3 years ago, he had familiarized himself with these spaces as part of his job, never imagining he would need them for their tactical value. Now, those sight lines and elevated positions were exactly what he needed. From the fourth-floor maintenance walkway, Marcus had a clear view of the lobby area where the first suspect was positioning himself to engage evacuating civilians. The range was approximately 150 meters, well within his capability even after 3 years away from active duty. But taking this shot would mean crossing a line he had sworn never to cross again. Marcus assembled his rifle with movements that were automatic after years of training. The scope brought the scene into sharp focus, and he could see the terror on the faces of people who were trying to evacuate. The gunman was raising his weapon toward a group of elderly conference attendees who were moving too slowly to reach the exit quickly. Marcus controlled his breathing, found his natural point of aim, and made the most difficult decision of his life. The shot was clean and precise, exactly as his training had taught him. The first gunman dropped immediately, his weapon clattering across the lobby floor harmlessly. But there were still 2 more suspects in the building, and Marcus could hear gunfire from other parts of the hospital. The battle was just beginning, and Marcus Chun was no longer just a paramedic trying to save lives. He was a sniper again, whether he wanted to be or not. The encrypted communicator crackled with urgent traffic, shots fired in the building. Multiple casualties reported. All units expedite response. Marcus was already moving to his next position. The skills he had spent 3 years trying to forget were now the only thing standing between innocent people and a coordinated terrorist attack. There was no more time for moral uncertainty or second-guessing. People were dying, and he was the only one in position to stop it. As he moved through the maintenance areas toward where he could hear gunfire echoing from the emergency department, Marcus realized that all his attempts to leave his past behind had been preparation for this moment. He had become a paramedic to save lives, and now he would have to become a sniper again for exactly the same reason. Marcus moved through the hospital's maintenance corridors with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done this before under much worse conditions. The sound of gunfire was coming from 2 directions now, the emergency department and what sounded like the 4th-floor conference rooms. The attackers were executing a coordinated plan designed to trap civilians between multiple points of assault. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear the chaos of police radio traffic as law enforcement units tried to establish a perimeter around the hospital. But they were dealing with an active shooter situation in a building full of innocent people, which meant they couldn't use their normal tactical options. This was exactly what the terrorists had counted on. Marcus reached a maintenance access point that opened onto the 4th floor near the conference rooms. Through the small window, he could see patients and medical staff barricaded behind overturned tables while one of the gunmen moved systematically through the hallway. The man was carrying an assault rifle and what appeared to be improvised explosive devices on his vest. "Control, this is Overwatch." Marcus spoke into his encrypted communicator, using his old military call sign. "I have eyes on suspect 2, 4th floor east wing. Multiple civilians trapped in his line of advance. Permission to engage. Overwatch, maintain observation only. Tactical units are forming up for coordinated assault." Marcus watched through the scope as the gunman raised his weapon toward a group of nurses who were trying to move patients away from the danger zone. There wasn't time to wait for tactical units to get into position. In the seconds Marcus spent considering his options, people would die. "Control, I have civilians in immediate danger. I'm taking the shot." Marcus didn't wait for authorization. The second gunman dropped with the same precision as the first, his weapon falling harmlessly to the floor. But the sound of the rifle shot echoed through the building, and Marcus knew his position was now compromised. He had to move quickly. The third gunman was somewhere in the emergency department, the area Marcus knew better than any other part of the hospital. As he made his way toward that section of the building, His radio crackled with reports that law enforcement was finally breaching the main entrances. But they were still several minutes away from reaching the areas where civilians were trapped. Marcus emerged from a stairwell onto the second floor, which gave him a clear view into the emergency department through a series of windows. What he saw made his blood run cold. The third gunman had taken hostages in the main treatment area, including Dr. Walsh and several nurses Marcus worked with every day. Tom Rodriguez was among them, his young face pale with terror. The hostage situation changed everything. Marcus couldn't risk a long-range shot with innocent people so close to the target. He would have to get closer, which meant abandoning his sniper's advantage and engaging in close-quarters combat. Marcus secured his rifle and drew the sidearm Colonel Harper had provided. Moving through the hospital's service corridors, he made his way toward the emergency department while listening to the gunman's demands over the hospital's intercom system. "I want all law enforcement to withdraw from the building immediately," the terrorist was saying. "Any attempt to enter this area will result in the immediate execution of hostages. I have enough explosives to bring down this entire wing of the hospital." Through a service door, Marcus could see into the main treatment area. The gunman was positioned behind the nurse's station with a clear view of all entrances, using the hostages as human shields. It was a tactically sound position that would be nearly impossible for a conventional assault team to overcome without casualties. But Marcus wasn't part of a conventional assault team. He was a lone operator with very specific skills and knowledge of the terrain that the terrorist couldn't have anticipated. Marcus accessed the hospital's central air handling system through a maintenance panel he had serviced countless times as part of his regular duties. The ventilation shafts were large enough to accommodate a person, and they led directly over the emergency department. It would be a difficult approach, but it would put him in a position the gunman wouldn't be watching. Crawling through the ductwork in full tactical gear was physically demanding, but Marcus's military training had prepared him for much worse conditions. He could hear the terrorist continuing to make demands while law enforcement negotiators tried to establish communication from outside the building. When Marcus reached the ventilation grate directly over the emergency department, he could see the entire situation laid out below him. The gunman was wearing an explosive vest, which confirmed that this was a suicide mission. Negotiation wasn't going to work because the terrorist had no intention of leaving the building alive. Marcus counted 12 hostages, including several patients who couldn't be moved quickly due to their medical conditions. Dr. Walsh was trying to provide medical care to a patient who appeared to be having a heart attack, working under the gunman's direct supervision. Tom was zip-tied to a chair near the nurse's station, close enough to the terrorist that any rescue attempt would put him at extreme risk. The situation required perfect timing and absolute precision. Marcus would have one chance to neutralize the threat without triggering the explosive vest or giving the gunman time to harm the hostages. It was exactly the kind of impossible shot that had made him legendary in military circles, but the stakes had never been more personal. Marcus positioned himself as close to the ventilation grate as possible while maintaining a stable shooting platform. The angle was difficult, shooting almost straight down at a target who was partially concealed behind the nurse's station. He would have to account for the downward trajectory, the deflection caused by shooting through the ventilation grate, and the risk of ricochet in a room full of innocent people. Through his scope, Marcus could see the terrorist's finger on the trigger of his rifle, ready to execute hostages at the first sign of assault. The explosive vest had what appeared to be a dead man's switch, which meant killing the gunman too quickly could still result in detonation. Marcus controlled his breathing and found his natural point of aim. The shot would have to be perfect, precise enough to cause instant incapacitation, but positioned to avoid triggering any explosive devices. He had made similar shots before, but never with so many innocent lives depending on absolute perfection. The terrorist moved slightly, adjusting his position behind the nurse's station. For just a moment, Marcus had a clear view of the target's head and neck area. It was the opportunity he had been waiting for. Marcus took the shot. The sound was muffled by the ventilation system, but the result was immediate. The gunman collapsed instantly, his weapons falling away from the hostages. Marcus waited several seconds to ensure there was no delayed detonation from the explosive vest, then quickly descended through the ventilation system to the main emergency department. The hostages were in shock, but unharmed. Dr. Walsh was the first to recognize him as he emerged from the maintenance area, still carrying his rifle. "Marcus? What are you doing here? How did you?" "Long story," Marcus replied, securing the area and checking the terrorists' weapons. "Are you hurt? Is anyone injured?" Tom Rodriguez was staring at him with a mixture of awe and confusion. "Marcus, how did you know how to do that? That was incredible." Before Marcus could answer, the emergency department was flooded with law enforcement officers and tactical teams. The building was secured, the threat was neutralized, and the evacuation was complete. But for Marcus, the hardest part was just beginning. In the hours that followed, Marcus found himself debriefed by local police, federal agents, and Colonel Harper. His actions had prevented what could have been a massive loss of life, but they had also revealed his background to colleagues who thought they knew him as just a paramedic. "How long have you been undercover here?" one of the FBI agents asked. "I'm not undercover," Marcus replied. "I really am a paramedic. This is my job, my life. The military background is just something I used to be." Dr. Walsh was waiting for him when the debriefings were finally finished. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you really who you say you are?" Marcus looked around the emergency department where he had worked for 3 years, saving lives and finding purpose after the darkness of his military service. "I'm exactly who I say I am," he answered. "I'm a paramedic. I've been a paramedic for 3 years, and I plan to be a paramedic for the rest of my career. Everything else is just something I used to be." "But you saved all those people today," Tom said, approaching hesitantly. "You're a hero." Marcus shook his head. "Heroes save lives every day. Doctors, nurses, paramedics, firefighters. We all save lives. I just happened to have some additional skills when they were needed." Colonel Harper appeared at Marcus's side. "You did good work today, soldier." "I'm not a soldier anymore," Marcus replied firmly. "I'm a paramedic. And tomorrow, I'll be back here doing my job, saving lives the way I trained to do for the past 3 years." Harper nodded with understanding. "The offer stands if you ever want to come back to active duty. But I think you've found where you belong." As the investigation teams finished their work and the hospital began returning to normal operations, Marcus found himself back in the ambulance bay with Tom, checking equipment for their next shift. The events of the day felt surreal, like something that had happened to someone else. "Are you going to teach me how to do that?" Tom asked, only half joking. Marcus smiled. "I'm going to teach you how to save lives, Tom. That's what we do here." Everything else was just an unusual situation that required unusual solutions. But as they prepared for their next emergency call, Marcus knew that his life had changed in fundamental ways. His colleagues now knew he was capable of things they couldn't have imagined, but they also knew he had chosen to use those capabilities in service of healing rather than harm. The secret was out, but it had been revealed in defense of everything he had come to value about his new life. The radio crackled with their next assignment. "Unit 23, respond to 847 Pine Street for a possible stroke victim. Elderly male, altered mental status." Marcus and Tom climbed into their ambulance and headed out into the night, ready to save another life. The weapons and tactical gear were back in storage, but the skills that had made Marcus an exceptional soldier continued to serve him as a paramedic. The difference was that now he was using those skills exclusively to preserve life rather than end it. As they drove through the city streets toward their next patient, Marcus realized that the events at the hospital had not changed who he was fundamentally. He was still a paramedic, still committed to saving lives, still seeking redemption through service to others. The only difference was that his colleagues now understood the full extent of what he was capable of when innocent lives were threatened. Marcus Chun had successfully defended St. Mary's Hospital using skills from his past, but he had done so as a paramedic protecting his workplace and colleagues. The circle was complete. He had used the training that once made him take lives to save lives instead. There was a symmetry to it that gave him peace in a way he hadn't expected. Tomorrow, he would be back to responding to heart attacks and car crashes, using his medical training to help people in crisis. The rifle would remain in storage, hopefully forever. But if circumstances ever again required him to protect innocent people using more extreme measures, Marcus now knew he could do so without losing himself in the process. He was a paramedic who had once been a sniper, and Today, he had proven that both aspects of his identity could work together in service of the same ultimate goal, preserving human life. The secret was no longer a burden, but simply another tool in his arsenal for helping others, to be used only when absolutely necessary, but available when the stakes demanded it. The man who had once been one of the Army's most effective snipers had become one of the city's most dedicated paramedics, and now everyone understood that both roles were just different expressions of the same fundamental commitment to protecting others.